welcome to the Spark of Ages podcast, where we're going to talk to founders, innovators, CEOs, investors, designers, and artists. I'm talking game changers about their big world-shaping ideas and what sparked them. I'm your host, Rajiv Parikh, and I'm the CEO and founder of Position Squared, a growth marketing company based in Palo Alto. So yes, I'm a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, but I'm also a business, news junkie, and history nerd. I'm fascinated by how big world-changing movements go from the spark of an idea to an innovation that reshapes our lives. In every episode, we're going to do a deep dive with our guests about what led them to their own eureka moments and how they're going about executing it, and perhaps most importantly, how they get other people to believe in them so that their idea could someday become a spark for the ages. And if you like what you hear, take a moment to rate it and comment. You can also send feedback to us directly at spark@position2.com. This is the Spark of Ages podcast. In addition to myself, we have our producer, Sandeep, who will occasionally chime in to make sure we don't get too in the weeds with tech jargon.
Yeah, very occasionally. Okay, it'll be a gentle, it'll be light touch. And I also do the game.
Sandeep rocks with games. Today, I'm excited because our guest is Anne DeGheest. She's someone who has dedicated her career as an executive, investor, and mentor to quite literally help saving lives, up to potentially 6 million lives over the last 40 years, according to her calculation.
Now that is a number.
It's a big number, and we're going to dig into how she got to that number. And frankly, I think she's being conservative. I got to know her really well over the years because I started a medical device company. I started it. I got it off the ground. I, of course, turned it over to other VCs, and I learned about this amazing person, Anne, who's known as just a winner when it comes to building companies and investing in health tech businesses.
This was back in your native days then, huh?
Well, my wife's native days. I was a high tech guy, so I started my first company, Apiron, which was all about asthma therapeutics, and pioneered the health tech space. She's the founder of HealthTech Capital and MedStars. She organizes and moderates the Health Tech Conference on how to successfully build innovative health tech businesses and change healthcare delivery. Since she founded MedStars in 1986, she's been a corporate development advisor to large healthcare companies and a mentor capitalist, specializing in investing and mentoring early stage companies in healthcare. Her life science portfolio companies have generated over $27 billion in market capitalization, including 8 IPOs, an amazing record. In 2010, Anne founded HealthTech Capital, a group of private investors dedicated to funding and mentoring new health tech startups to decrease healthcare cost and empower patients. HealthTech Capital is an ecosystem of angels, venture capitalists, providers, payers, and healthcare industry key players with 3 sets of expertise needed to succeed in the new health tech space. That's healthcare, technology, and user engagement. She also has an MBA from my favorite school, Harvard Business School, and a master's in business engineering from University of Brussels. Anne is also a recognized artist. You can find her at adegeest.com, adegeest.com. Let's get to our conversation with Anne DeGheest. Anne, welcome to Spark of Ages.
Thank you, Rajiv. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. And you coined the term health tech, and that's different than MedTech. How do you define digital health and this term health tech?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking the question. So this was around 1985, so a long time ago. Basically, at the time, I was just coming out of a startup called Nellcore. If any of you have a device you put on your finger after COVID, that's called pulse oximeter, and I launched that worldwide for that company, Nellcore. So I had learned the experience of medical devices. But also, before my prior company, I was in the early 1979, 1980, the computer and telecom industry in Silicon Valley. And I had this dual knowledge. And if you think about medical devices and MedTech and Biotech, it's all about taking a product risk going after an existing market, because you spend so much time, 5-10 years, to go doing clinical trials, showing it works on animals, showing it works on humans, begging the FDA to agree with you, finally going on the market. The last thing you're going to do is create a market. In traditional tech, it's the reverse. It's all about high market risk, taking low product risk. So you're disrupting market, creating new market. So health tech was basically reversing the approach of traditional life science investment, which is to only invest in companies that have unique IP, and it's all about a product risk with a market waiting for them. And says, why don't we do the reverse like we do in tech, where we're going to use off-the-shelf technology from the emerging computer and technology industry and improve workflow, improve efficacy, so that the endpoint, the measure of success, was reducing cost and improving time efficiencies. With traditional MedTech and Biotech, it's all about clinical outcome and efficacy and safety. So it was a totally new paradigm. And literally for, 30 years, I was a lone ranger, kind of a lonely person there. People thought I was crazy. There was this crazy Belgium there. And then I got lucky or smart, depending who you're talking to. And I got all this company I helped, and they couldn't get funding because they had no IP. They were just changing the way we deliver drugs in a hospital setting, which nobody cared about, or how we help the nurses be more efficient, which at the time nobody cared about. And so this company all went public. They had a hard time raising money, and they ended up with all these huge IPOs and very successful exit. So finally, my joke was that in 2010, I got so frustrated that every time I had another group of entrepreneurs was helping get the company off the ground, VCs couldn't get it. They say, I got lucky last time, this one will never work, which was a very constant feedback I was getting. I started HealthTech Capital, which is I'm going to find other maverick like me who wants to change healthcare. And if you think about it, everybody should care, because at some time we're going to be patients or caregivers. We all go through this. And so we all have opinion about how screwed up the healthcare system is. I always joke, finding a problem in healthcare is not a needle, a haystack. It's a haystack of needles. There's a lot of those. The magic is finding a business models that work for all the different stakeholders, the physicians, the doctor, the hospitals, and all of that. So I started this group, HealthTech Capital, with the idea that I will find other people who are willing to give a tiny bit of money, angel investors there. And then I added VCs and corporate VCs afterwards to basically help this company get off the ground so they can show that it works. And then you can attract venture capital. So that's kind of the long journey. So I describe myself as the health tech pioneer. I coined the word health tech because there was MedTech and Biotech.
That's right.
And I didn't want to have anything to do with healthcare IT for a long list of reasons. And I says, let's get the technology to improve usability of the existing way we deliver care.
That's so cool. So Anne, in your bio, it says that you've saved over 6 million people. Now, by my calculations, I think I've saved maybe 4 people in my life. I don't know, Rajiv, what's your number? Maybe 8? You've saved me probably 3 or 4 times. You can only count me once.
So you get 9 lives. So. Yeah, I've saved a bunch of people multiple times. And probably a bunch of people have saved me. So maybe on balance, I'm at.
Okay, yeah, it cancels out. So Anne, how do you get to that number, 6 million? I mean, that's an amazing number.
Well, the nice thing about healthcare is that every startup is difficult. It is painful. It's a life-changing journey there. But when it does work, it has an impact with a huge scale. And so the way I came up with that numbers was really funny. My son was in high school, and they had asked some parents to do like a panel on what should be different careers. And of course, everybody wanted to be a venture capitalist, to which I told them, I said, well, what's your experience create value to the entrepreneurs as opposed to, having a nice lifestyle? And so I decided I need to have a way to basically tell the people that you can have a huge impact on life. So I basically calculated that based on, for example, in pulse oximetry with Nellcore, at the time, we had 50 to 75,000 mishaps per year. And this was documented, which was a way to say people were dying in anesthesia that shouldn't have happened. You can die for clinical reasons. And after we launched pulse oximetry, that dropped by a factor of 80%. So all of that has been documented. So I multiplied that number every year. And I know this was the case in Europe and other places like that. So that was one. VisiQ, which was another very successful startup, is a company that came out of Johns Hopkins. And in this case of Johns Hopkins, they monitor all the patients in the ICUs and send all the vital signs remotely to remote locations. So think about the air traffic controller for the intensive care unit is what they were doing. And then as the patient was starting going in the wrong directions, they intervene earlier, as opposed to wait for the intensivist to come twice a day for 15 minutes. The data has been documented in 20 or 30 multiple studies showing that they were able to decrease by 20% the mortality in the ICU. So since you knew that they were now monitoring around 15 to 20% of the ICU patients in the country, because the system now it has been sold everywhere, and then you know what the mortality rate in the ICU, because that's also published, and then you multiply all the numbers, you end up with some of these numbers there. And there were some other, type of technology there. So they were all based on not my finger in the air, based on real data, and then looking over a certain time period there. It's probably higher than that by now, but incredible. And it's not me personally doing it.
It's a good conservative number. I think that's fair. I got to say, though, I know we're jumping ahead. I think the pulse oximetry device is one of the most imaginative uses of a medical device. It's very simple. It just goes on your finger. And and it can tell you the oxygen saturation in your blood, and that can tell you a whole bunch of things.
It also gives you your heart rate. What people learned, for example, with COVID is that when your normal saturation is 97% at sea level, and then that's your arterial blood, and then in venous it's at 75%. So you really have a very short window between 97 to 75% to deliver oxygen to the tissue. So when COVID happens, what people learn is that when you're dropping because your lungs are not functioning right because of the virus, the heart rate can double. So your resting heart rate can go from 60 to 120. So those two numbers are really essential to tell you go to the ER, get some help right away. But in the early days, it took 2 years to explain to anesthesiologists with very sophisticated clinicians that they were thinking before in millimeter of mercury. They were looking at the percent of oxygen in your blood, which is only 3% of the oxygen. 97% of the oxygen is carried by the hemoglobins there. So every new concept, when you ask people to speak English to French, for example, you have to spend some time explaining it. And we did that, but we became the fastest standard of care ever in the medical device technology there. And that's because we worked at creating education, being a market leader, showing that it works on babies, on adults, in surgeries, in recovery rooms, in intensive care units. It's market creation. And that's the thing I was leading, is the whole marketing area.
Really cool. My wife actually worked for Bill New's company, Natus Medical.
Oh, yes.
So I got to meet him early on. And Wendy Hutton of Canaan, who I think you overlapped with.
Yeah, I heard Wendy into Nelcor.
That's right. She was an investor in my medical device, my one and only medical device company.
Oh, it is a small world.
I wish I had you on my board, because then we would have really kicked butt. So VCs say that one of the trickiest things about investing in healthcare is that the returns in many cases hinge on humans changing their personal behavior. And that's a lot harder than building a B2B SaaS platform. As I mentioned, I've started a medical device company. I'd never imagined how hard it would be to get that off the ground, because not only do you have to get the technology built and to market, and sometimes it's a research technology to something that you can produce, but you also have to convince the most skeptical people in the world, doctors, to actually use your product, and then medical societies to embed that in their standard of care, and then insurance companies to actually pay for it. So how does an early stage health tech investment approach compare to traditional tech from your point of view?
That is a fantastic question there. I think the challenge of healthcare, which if you know how to do it, become the reason why you're successful and you create a barrier of entry, is the ability of spending more time on the problem from the viewpoint of each stakeholders. What is the viewpoint of the nurse? What's the viewpoint of the physician? What's the pain point of the patient? What's the pain point of the person paying for it, which could be the CFO of a hospital or a pay or pharma, depending what the business model is. And when I see the mistake a lot of people are making, which is that I'm going to develop this new disrupting technology, and it's going to be so obvious the world will come to my doorsteps. And we all know that never happens. In healthcare, there's so much resistance, it's even harder. And then the other problem that there is in healthcare is that you cannot be too disruptive, because if you break the model there's huge resistance to change. Or there's the power of the payment system, which is very difficult to understand. So in traditional tech, you can break the models like Apple has done multiple times and disrupt industries.
Or you could break the law like Uber.
Yeah. And what
you kind of get away with it because you're not killing people.
And you look at Microsoft, Google, and in some way Apple they try to get into healthcare, the traditional healthcare, and they quickly discover that is very difficult to disrupt. So Apple has been really brilliant in the sense that they're staying on the consumer health as opposed to the healthcare acute care side. So the big challenge, I think, I always tell entrepreneurs, don't tell me your solution. Don't tell me your black box. Think about the black box as an input and an output. Tell me what's the problem. That's the input. Why is it urgent? Big deal, blah, 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 from all the different stakeholders. What's the output? What do they get out of it? And if I still believe you have a good problem that's large and big and crying for a solution, you have a solution that if it does work, then you can tell me how you do it. And typically what you have is the reverse. And especially in Silicon Valley, with a tendency to fall in love. Like right now, AI is the new hype. And I'm getting to be old enough to have lived through the internet hype and a whole bunch of other hypes. And at the end, it's just an enabling technology. You have to go back to say, people don't buy technology. They buy a solution to a specific problem. Spend more time on the problem. And at times, there's conflict of interest that you may not be able to get around it. And then you should try and modify your problem that you're fixing or what you're doing there. But if you really spend the time there, like Pyxis, for example, is a company I was involved with. And it was a doctor who had lost a patient due to medication error. And he started a company to say, well, why don't we have like a Coke dispensing machine at the point of care at the bedside that will dispense the meds so that, there's no error there. And that's when they initially started to develop. And for a long list of reasons, it doesn't make any sense for the pharmacist or for the nurses to have this Coke dispensing machine. If you have 300 bed hospitals now, you need 600 carousel you have to rotate every day. I mean, a long list of reasons doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So they were going to get shut down. And so I was asked by NEA to come and help. And I says, you have the right problem, you have the wrong solution. Let's spend more time from the viewpoint of the players. And the key player was not the pharmacist, it was the nurses. The nurses wants to make sure, give me the right med for the right patient at the right time without any hassle. And I know with the DEA, I have to be careful with narcotics. So I'm willing to do some extra steps there. And so we took the concept of ATM for banking, which is remote inventory management of cash for the bank, and modify it and say, we're going to do remote inventory management of narcotics and other drugs that needs to be controlled, and then move the inventory from the basement of the hospital was highly controlled but hard to get to the floors, but with the extra controls. And now we had a nurse who loved it because they were willing to punch a few things just to make sure the inventory was correct, to basically give them all the time when they needed the drugs when the patient had to have it. And so that concept of understanding the workflow, who is in charge, and initially the nurse paid for it and over time the pharmacist paid for it, that's the magic. I call myself a business architect. You have to build the different models from the viewpoint of all the players.
So, I mean, that's the whole thing, right? As part of that early stage to mid stage to late stage investing, right? That somebody may come in initially with something that sounds really cool, but a certain early stage buyer buys it. And then you're getting to later stage. And what you're talking about is the practices are about human lives. So it better be really urgent and painful for this solution to come in, because there's going to be skepticism. But it's not just the early adopter, it's also the people that are actually going to use the product later that makes it something that you want to think through as an entrepreneur, certainly, but as the investor helping the entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, people need to understand the viewpoint of the players. So for example, if a nurse has to do something extra, you have to do something for the nurse. They're overwhelmed. I mean, they get interrupted every 6 minutes.
They have a super hard job.
So if you ask them to do something extra there, you better do something that's good for her so that she's your champion there. And if you ask the pharmacist to change what they're doing there, you better do something for them too. In this case, we make sure they didn't have an infraction there. And at the time, it was like $10,000 per infraction per person. So
oh my gosh.
That was expensive. And so you really need to go deep dive and spend time with the players there, observing them, following them, talking to them. At the time, for example, I remember this is in the 80s when we tried to turn around Pyxis, is that I flew to Florida in the middle of July and August in one of the trade shows that was for VP of nursing. I was the only person from industry at that conference. This is a long time ago. And I spent time with them and understood their viewpoint. I understand their challenges in budgeting and then nurse being unhappy and not being able to find nurse and the turnover and the extra time. This is their real life. Then you put the value proposition them to says, I'm going to save you money, make your nurse happier, and you take away that hassle. There's a no-brainer when you see it from that perspective, but you have to invest in learning their viewpoint. And I think every problem as an entrepreneur, you need to do that. Healthcare is complicated because we have this conflicting stakeholder. We have conflict of interest between them. And you have to navigate, how you can make a win-win for each one of them, which may mean extra features for the different stakeholders.
I think you were at one point calling this the Series B crunch, where you have the earlier stage ones, and then you have the company gets to a certain point, you're trying to sell it to the market. It's a mid to late stage kind of companies. So you have to navigate that whole continuum as part of getting your product to market. And even you, as the investor, need to see that entrepreneur has that capability.
Yeah, I always say for me, the definition of success is to find an entrepreneur who has a flexible mindset. And the reason is that there is no straight line in entrepreneurship. It's a whole bunch of zigzag with, step upwards and then 15 step backwards at time.
That's right.
And so you need somebody who is comfortable to be able to make decisions with 20% of the facts, because it's more important to move the ball and learn more, as opposed to people who are in big company who have learned that if you do that, you're going to get yourself fired pretty quickly. And you bid it for collect 95% and get consensus and all the things like that, which is a very slow decision process. In a startup, it's important to have something that works and getting feedback as long as the life of the patient is not on the line. And then you learn and you adjust and correct. It also means you need to understand that when something doesn't go wrong, it's not a mistake. It's not that somebody, did something wrong. It's just you learn something new that you did not know before and you adjust and correct. So the leadership of managing those people and the type of people you are is very important. If you get people who are very analytical, needs data, very judgmental there, they cannot survive a startup because you have too many of these change of direction based on new information there. So it's the culture that you create, the ability to correct. When you start, it's total chaos because that's when there's one or two people, that's what it is. And then over time, you start building some structure and you try to get organized chaos. And when you get to that series B you were talking about, this is when you need to put more structure in place, but still keeping that flexibility of adjusting and correct as opposed to freezing. And you see a lot of companies right now are blowing up. And we saw the same thing during the dot-com because there is a ton of money thinking they were scaling up and they hadn't fully figured out the cookie and the cookie model. And then they were forced by the investor, because as they pay huge valuations there and they have a lot of money, to say scale up, freeze the process and scale up. And guess what? If you freeze the process and scale up something that's not hard in cement at the bottom there, it collapses. And selling to a hospital right now used to be a 2-year selling cycle. Now it's probably even longer than that. Payers are the same thing. Payers know one word, no, they don't pay.
Right.
We see the whole digital therapeutics.
The first answer is always no, right?
Yeah. I mean,
that's the thing. And the first answer is no, and you got to work your way through it. And I think you even alluded to, there was this moment where up to 2019, and there was a certain market environment there, a certain capital environment. It exploded in 2021 slightly into 2022. Then it came crashing back down, right? So I wonder from your perspective, because I know from your process, you're very disciplined about how you invest or how you guide people to invest. There's like this overhang where so much money got pumped in. I doubt the ideas were all of a sudden better in 2021 than it was in 2019 or today, right? The funding level went up 4 to 5x in the field, and then it's come back down. So you must sense it and see it. Do you feel that there's after effects to it? And how does that play out in terms of the innovation that you see happening all the time?
This is what's called déjà vu. I'm French, so I have to use that word.
Déjà vu all over again.
It's the whole thing from the internet all over again. There was the same craziness there. So where people could do no wrong, they were being given $50, $100 million check without really the level of validation you normally would have at valuation that were very high. And now what they're discovering is that you need multiples of revenues to get to those valuations, but they don't have the revenues yet. And those revenues have a selling cycle, especially in healthcare. So a lot of these companies are doing what's called bridges and extension. There was a very interesting report that just came out, I think it was the old Silicon Valley Bank, that 30% of the medical device were down rounds and pretty much 70% were flat or extensions. And most people are not doing new investment. And so this is the chicken and egg problem we have lived in the past, which is that everybody is anchoring their existing portfolio companies. They are prioritizing and doing triage into we have to keep them alive because we have so much money in. This is we have a tiny bit of money, we can let it go if need be. And the one we don't know, well, we have to see how they progress. And the problem is that if company A, B, and C, my judgment may be different than your judgment. So when a company is looking for more funding there, nobody wants to do a down round because their valuation is too high because they could not grow the revenue to the crazy stuff that people were expecting. And so you see all this bad language called pay to play, down round, full ratchets, all the ugly stuff that have happened in prior cycles. They're all back. We had one deal there where we retroactively got full ratchet. I had never seen that before.
You put in a full ratchet after. For anybody who wants to know this as an entrepreneur who went through my company, took a while, of course, like all med companies, take a while to get off the ground and a while to get funded, a while to build your product or get acceptance, et cetera. I went through 2008, 2009, which was miserable for my company. And for anybody who knows, full ratchet means you as the entrepreneur are screwed.
I'm not sure it's fully defined that way, but that's the consequence.
Okay. So for me as the entrepreneur, it's like, oh God, I'm screwed. Because what happens is a down round means your valuation from the last time to this time is less. And who gets their money back first? It is the investors, the way these contracts are written. And you can't really avoid it. That's just the game. And because there's so much risk, that's the way it is.
Well, Rajiv, it's even worse than that. There is what's called liquidation preference,
yes,
which means
liquidation reference.
I can get 2 to 3x my money back before Common gets a dime.
Yes. So there's even more pain. There's so much pain in it. So the key, as Anne suggests here, is when you go for your investment, maybe you go for a quote unquote more reasonable valuation so that later on when things happen, you don't get slammed like this. Sometimes people announce victory for the valuation that they get, and the valuation actually means nothing until the end.
I am totally 100% with you. I always tell the entrepreneurs success is defined with the common worth a lot of money, because if you're worth a lot of money, preferred does very well. But success is not your valuation. Valuation has no meaning. It goes up and down like a yo-yo. And I think a lot of people are learning this the real hard way there. A lot of people still don't understand that. And the other thing that also happened is the tech investors became as what's called tourist investor. Remember what I said at the beginning there, their business models, they're like the hunter versus the farmer. Let me explain that. So in traditional healthcare there, pretty much every deal, you will only know if they succeed by the time you go for the FDA and you go to market. And that's when you get acquired or you basically get some early sales. So you need all of them to make it because you have the full $50 million investment by that time there. In the tech side, that's the farmer concept. You want yield of your crops. Everyone has to produce. The hunter approach is the traditional tech industry, which is 70% of my investment will bust. I won't make any money there. I'm looking for that big elephant or that big tiger, whatever you're looking for, to basically pay for the rest of it. So my job is to continuously hunt for that big one or two that's going to give me that 20 return that justify the rest. And the rest, I don't pay any attention to them because as soon as I put you into the category, will not make 10 to 20x, I won't pay attention to that. In traditional healthcare, you have to pay attention to all of them. So the type of investor you have is essential. You really want, in the best of all case, on your board, you want people that are here to help you. And the way they help you there is that they have an operating background. So when you go for the ups and downs of zigzagging, they have been through it and they can tell the difference between it's normal versus something is really wrong here. The second thing is that you want people who have an expectation are aligned with you. If an investor comes in there to say, fine, I'll give you a $200 million valuation there and I expect you to get $30 million in sales next year, even if you have the cure for death, it doesn't happen that fast in healthcare. No. That's just the nature of the beast. So you want people who are aligned with what's called realistic expectation. Because guess who gets killed the first one after things don't go the right way? Is the CEO.
That's right.
They have a 50% life expectancy of 18 months after the Series B. I mean, that's what some of my big VCs were telling me in the study they did around here. So you want people who are aligned, they understand what you're going through, they understand the business models you're going through. They know it takes 2 years to get to the payers, but then it's very sticky there. They know what type of data you have to collect to get to the payers there. They know that you just don't get a new code. I mean, the average code in healthcare takes 5 years to get coverage. And even if you get a code, that doesn't mean they pay for it, which is what digital therapeutics is learning right now. They're just all blowing up. Some of them at $500 million in fundraising. I mean, this is a huge amount of money.
And like you say, even with all that money, it's the whole 9 months baby, 9 women,
exactly.
1 month. You're not.
It doesn't change them. They have the ultimate power.
It takes time, right? So you talked about all these amazing challenges that we have to deal with as the entrepreneur, but there's a reason you're doing it. It's because you want to make a difference in the world. So for you go back to your background. You have master's in business engineering. Then you got your MBA. Did you always know you wanted to be in tech, or did you always know that you wanted to eventually do something in health tech, or did you discover the passion as you went? By the way, Anne, you strike me as an always passionate person, so maybe you're always passionate about whatever you did.
Thank you. I should hire my PR person.
I'm pretty good at that.
Yeah. Well, I'm the ultimate. I was honored at the Computer Museum and they asked you to use one word for yourself. And I said, that's kind of an interesting exercise if you think about it. So whatever came to your mind, that's your word. So I'll let you decide to share it or not. In my case, I came up with the word fearless. And what I learned is that, I came from Belgium originally there, and I was told, women don't go to engineering school, and especially that one, because it was the best one. Of course, I immediately went there as a result of that.
Well, that for you probably was the motivator.
I'm a contrarian. I'm a very good contrarian. And then I was told, don't go to Harvard Business School because that's not for you. At the time, there were barely 9% women there at the time. So it was kind of the early days. And of course, I went there. Then I discovered you all spoke English. So I had to learn English,
At Harvard Business School, 50% of your grade for any class is your ability to discuss the case.
So there were some famous moments there where I couldn't explain what I was trying to say. So I literally got up, went to the blackboard and started writing all these things there. That had never happened before. Because I couldn't explain in English what it was. I was correct, but it was like, people say, okay, who is she? And so my point of view is that I'm fearless, and I've learned that at time you can ask, and 80% of the time they say no, but the other 20% that allows you to do things you didn't think you could do. So always try, because rejection is the way you respond to the situation there. So if you take that mindset and now you apply this to entrepreneurship, there is no rejection there, because you always learn something when somebody said no to selling your product or getting fundraising, because as an entrepreneur, you have to continuously sell. You sell to other people to follow you, to do the job, and not having any idea if you can pay their salaries in 6 months. You have to basically sell to the investor. These are your first big customers. Then you have to basically sell to your vendors so they agree to work with you, then to the customers. I mean, it's a constant there. Every time you learn something. So if you take that mindset that every interaction, every rejection, every bad news is a thing that you can learn from. If you have that mindset, then you can accomplish anything.
Is that why this notion of sales, and this is a topic we've talked about in other of my podcast episodes, so this is great that you're talking about it. Is that why you went into marketing and sales out of business school? Because you felt like I needed to hone this capability?
No, I did not have a grandiose plan to save 6 million lives. Let's say it this way. I had no idea. What I wanted when I came here is that I got open discrimination in Belgium. And so I said, I should try to see if I can stay in America. So I took a job. I got like 10 offers, but one was with a green card. So I said, okay, I'll go there. And that turned out to be a company called Raychem. And I started there and they put me in finance, quickly discovered that's not where the action is. And I said, I want to be in sales. I said, we've never had a woman in sales. This is a Fortune 500. So I said, fine, I'll be the one. So then they gave me, this is kind of how you can take lemonade and make it into something very valuable, is that they put me in an area which was the early day of the computer and telecom industry where I had no customers and no product to sell. Not much, let's say it this way. So I couldn't screw up. And then my boss was just leaving me alone because I was an embarrassment that he had a woman in sales. That turned out to be the blessing of my life because since I had nothing to do, I went to all the trade show of my customer, which was the IBM, the ROHM, the National Semiconductor. And I talked to their marketing people to say, what is the biggest problem you have with your product specs right now that creates problem for you to sell the product? Which I think nobody has ever asked them that. And they told me they had the problem with certain things. So then I went back to engineering and I said, listen, you no idea who I am. And I had broken English, so my English was still not perfect. And I says, but I'm working with your competitor on this new technology that's been used for NASA or the military, which is what Raychem was at the time. And we think that it's something interesting. I know you're very busy, but is there somebody under you that would be interesting to talk to me? Of course, they always say yes to that. So then I showed up there, and then this was the time where the 49ers were very successful. And they say, who is this woman? They let me wait into the reception for half an hour or something like that. And I said, oh, did you see Joe Montana? By the time I was finished, I had a whole tour of the place, and they told me all their problem. And I went back to R&D, I designed product, and I went back and sold the product. And I was forced to learn that the hard way by myself. That skill set is what I use the rest of my life.
So that your ability to throw yourself into a problem, not being afraid of being thrown out, and then asking questions along the way, and then discovering as you go, having an open mind and discovering, and then bringing that problem back and being persuasive about it.
And then the other thing you learn in sales is that, especially in tech sales, is that people don't buy based on specs. They buy based on who you are and if they trust you. If you speak their language and you speak about their pain point, and they're going to take a risk with a product that's still unproven. In my case, it wasn't even built yet. And you says, I will be there. So every time there's a setback, like I was always the last person to get the shipping because I was the woman, the annoying woman. And so I was driving down Silicon Valley there with my truck loaded with all the parts that ROHM wanted to wait because we shut down the production line of ROHM because they hadn't built the product fast enough. And you go out of your way to do everything you can for your customer, their loyalty and their trust. I never discussed the price of the product until I sent a purchase order.
Because you felt the need and you felt you had built up the need so strongly.
Yeah, I mean, that one is a funny story. I can share it. So at the time, the company, Raychem, had bought another company that had waterbed heater. So they had this technology where they could change the polymer property to generate heat. And I says, if you generate heat, you change the conductivity of the material. That more you can have like a fuse that turns on and off. But when the fuse blows up, you have to replace it. So if you have a telephone switch in a small to medium-sized businesses there, you don't want to have your design with all the fuse in the front. That's terrible design. Plus, you need to send somebody to fix it when a telephone line goes bad. So I says, why don't we have a resettable switch? Then you can bury it in the back of the design. That concept, I was capturing the value of the whole workflow just with that one little product there. So I was replacing a 5 cents part with a $5 part, but the value was that I was enabling them to sell millions of dollars in a market that was unhappy with the fact that the design was not manageable for a plug-and-play market. And I understood that because I talked to the marketing person. I said, what is your problem? And then I basically talked to the engineers to find out what the reason of the problem was. And then I talked to my engineer.
And you took it all the way.
To say, is there a technology we can modify? So we use waterbed technology to sell to the telecom industry a resettable fuse.
Now I see the roots of it. So that's why eventually you coined the term HealthTech. And because you saw the ability of using capabilities studies or developed technologies to solve bigger and more interesting ones. So that, in Nelcor, you had a similar situation, right, with the nurses and how people are managing healthcare. And then you also see that in a lot of the other companies that you were either an executive in or in the ones you're funding.
Yeah, you're totally right. And that's why you asked me earlier. The mindset is to be curious and continuously try to put yourself into the shoe of the person that has a major role to play in your business model there, and show empathy and spend time with them, talk to more than one, just to make sure that you have diversity there. And then it becomes obvious. Very often people cannot articulate the real reason of their pain, or they take it for granted. Like in anesthesia, people assume that 50,000 people every year should die from anesthesia errors. Now we show that now there's a solution to fix it. But we had to be very gentle when we went to market, not to blame the anesthesiologists. It wasn't their fault. They didn't have the technology at the time. Now it was there. And that's how we became the standard of care in 2 years, which is unheard of.
Just incredible.
Now we worked really hard for that. We did a lot of things to make that happen.
So do you feel like you led yourself into these, or was there some point in your life, like you've been a CEO of your own advisory firm, was there something that sparked you in terms of an advisor that you worked with, a mentor? Or were you just generally, was this something your parents did? Is this, what got you to these amazing moments in your life?
I quickly learned that when there's a wall in front of me, hitting myself against the wall multiple times doesn't really help. And I had to go under the wall, blow up the wall, jump over the wall, or do things that are non-traditional there. And I started that when I was really young. I think I was like 7 years old, and I was born in February there. So I would have been 6 months before, 6 months after, in the age of the things. And I went to school early, so I was always the young bud in the cream. So they had decided they want me to repeat my second year of elementary school or something like that. And I said, no, I didn't had bad grades. I just wasn't working very hard. And so they pissed me off so badly. I said, I want to continue, but they forced me to go in different class. So for the first time in my life, I worked and I ended up like top percentile there. And then they said, you see, I told you I was smart. And then they brought me back to my old group, and then I cruised again. And so I had this moment when I was really young to say that it's up to me. These people aren't fair, and that's the way life is. Get used to it. And I understood their role and what was the criteria for me to get what I wanted, which is to go back to my friends. And, I showed them I could do that. When I finished high school, I had the same experience. I wanted to go to this university to get this engineering degree. And I was told by my professor that this is not where women should go. And I should be a social agent or something like that. And I said, I will embarrass them. And I said, that's bullshit. That's my life, not theirs. And so I went there, and they scared me enough because this was a program there where in the first year we had 500 students coming in, and they basically eliminated 90% before the exam in June. It was just like machine gun types, mathematics, physics, and chemistry. And if you didn't have the average there. So the first time I worked, and for the first time in my life, I ended up being this, what's called the exceptional value on the normal curve distribution there, like the one that was off the chart. But I'd never been in that situation before, because before that I was just cruising. And I learned that when I apply myself and I'm driven there, and I could do amazing things. So I started believing in myself. And then I did the same thing to go to Harvard Business School. I said, this is not where women should go, especially because I had no English. And I managed to track down all the professors from Harvard Business School were in Europe. I contacted them in France and Switzerland. I said, listen, you don't know where Belgium is, but I need your reference there. And they were so amazed by that. They let me in without speaking English. Then I got a phone call.
They're like, look, if she's going to go this far, she's obviously going to change the game here. I think
and then
that's
there was
probably in their head.
Yeah.
They're looking for leaders, right? So
well, they're looking for people who just don't get stuck in the same pathway and everybody else. If you think about people who are successful at whatever it is, not only entrepreneurship, but everything else in their life, is people are looking left, looking right, looking in front of them and to say, okay, this is not working. What can I do differently? As opposed to feeling sorry and putting blame and anger, which we have unfortunately a lot in the US right now, is that people are trying to find for a solution and be creative about it. And the more you're successful, regardless of what the challenges are, the more you believe there's always a way out of this mess.
So was there like a parent, a mom or dad that was all about this? Or I love how you say, well, I was cruising, and then when I had the opportunity to jump, or when I got punched, I decided to punch back even harder, right? By jumping ahead and showing them what you could do. Was there someone in your life like that you saw that and you say, you know what, I'm going to model that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. My mom, during World War II, she wanted to go after the end of the war to that specific university I went to, which is very prestigious. And they told them that all the soldiers were coming back from the war, and it was only be men. Only men were allowed to get in at that university there. So she tried to take some of the free class because it's a public university there, but she could not pass the exam and get the degree. So she was always frustrated by that really open discrimination she had. So when I expressed the desire to do the hard stuff, which is Latin, mathematics, and tried to go to that school and all the other things like that. She was very supportive, despite the fact that people were telling me I shouldn't do that. My own professor were telling me I shouldn't do that. That was not my role. And so she was supportive to say, whatever you want, I'll support you. She didn't tell me to do that. And I think she was, when I finished summa cum laude #1 of my promotion there, 5 women. So
Wow.
she was probably, part of that was to try to show that, thank her for what she had done there. So what I learned is that it all comes from within, and you need some good mentor who are supporting you. But at the end of the day, it also to be driven from inside yourself and be accountable. If things don't go your way, which God knows I had a lot of things that didn't go my way, you just take a pause and find out, what did I do differently? What should I do differently the next time? What are the lessons learned, as opposed to blame, feeling sorry for yourself or whatever it is. So I think that's just an attitude in life. That's why I call this the flexible mindset. And that's for everything in life.
You know what you talked about actually motivates my wife. I get to see her every day like this, because she's also an entrepreneur. And the biggest thing you can do to her is tell her she can't do something, and she will then find a way to bowl you over and knock you over. I see this energy in so many amazing women that we talk to. And we actually have a quiz for you.
Yes, you're entering my zone now.
Since you are such an advocate of people who are making a difference, and many of them are women, and so Sandeep's got a whole game for you.
We have a game sort of based on, women entrepreneurs. Listen, my wife as well is starting her own business. Cannot wait to share this podcast with her, because what you've already talked about is so inspiring. And we hope to sort of pass that on. Part of this is about the current setup and the current situation for women in the US in particular trying to start businesses. In our research about you, it's been clear that you've been very passionate about clearing a better path for female entrepreneurs. So here's a little multiple choice game to help educate our listeners on the state of female entrepreneurship. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. So question #1, what percentage of small businesses in the United States are owned by women as of the latest available data? Is it A, 10%, B, 25%, C, 40%, or D, just shy of the percentage of people who don't use their gym memberships?
Well, if you incorporate small businesses, which are not venture-backed types, but it's around 40%.
Ding, ding, ding. Exactly right. The landscape of U.S. small businesses is rapidly changing, with approximately 42% of all businesses being women-owned. That's right. So the last 2 decades have seen a more pronounced increase in the U.S. This kind of surprised me. Women went from owning about 26% of businesses in 1997 to over 40% now. So there's been a nice growth. And from what I read as well, that COVID-19, the pandemic, had a role in this growth. With a bunch of women facing job losses or seeking greater work-life balance, they turned to starting their own businesses. And half of the new businesses formed during the pandemic were started by women, a substantial rise from 29% in 2019.
That's an incredible leap.
That's wild, right? So 1 for 1, Anne's doing great. Question #2, according to research, women-led startups generate how much more revenue per dollar invested compared to male-led startups on average? It's already a given that they generate more. How much more? Is it A, 10 cents more, B, 63 cents more, C, $1.17 more, or D, enough to buy a latte in the Bay Area more, which is, I believe,
I'm not
$12.
sure what the sense is. I know it's 20% more. I don't know how you sense. I don't know is that a dollar investment?
So per dollar, yeah.
Oh, per dollar.
It's per dollar invested. How much more do women-led startups make than men?
In revenue.
Oh, in revenues. They have higher returns and higher return on investment for the investors. That is for sure. And it's around 20 to 50% depending on the sectors.
Got it. Well, guess what?
And it's the same thing for a public company, by the way. If you have a woman on the public board, and I don't know if that's your next questions there, those companies have higher earnings and higher PE ratios.
That's right. So it is 63 cents more. So here's the idea, is that startups funded by women are efficient at turning investment into revenue, generating 78 cents per dollar invested compared to 31 cents per dollar invested for those founded by men. So that's where that came from. But I think the point is investors, stop taking your golf date with Ricky and Barry, start schmoozing their wives.
Well, I think the other reason is, before you ask your next question, is that, remember what I said earlier, women have better empathy in putting themselves into the shoes of somebody else. That's what they do in a family very effectively. And they're also better listeners. And remember what I said, you need to spend time with your customers and ask a lot of questions and listening to what they don't tell you. That's how you identify the better problems. So they have, I think, slightly better skills in that area there. The second part of it is that we work twice as hard as the men. And so therefore we have a bigger output. We want to show something, we want to prove the world because we have a lot of open barriers against us. So you find that those people there who are the leader of these startups there, they have an incredible productivity throughput. They also are able to rally teams because we have a lot of this empathy and listening skills there, which in a startup is very important there to understand all the different frustration people are going through. So therefore, they're able to have probably better culture.
Makes a lot of sense. So here's the flip side of it for question number 3. What percentage of venture capital funding globally goes to female-founded startups? I'll give you my multiple choice. A, 2%, B, 15%, C, 35%, or D, roughly the same percentage as people who enjoy pineapple on pizza?
So the question is that the woman CEO, or there's women in the management team, or the woman is a founder, there's a male CEO? I mean, how do you define this?
Women founders.
So as women CEO, it's 6%, and that has gone down in the last few months. If the woman is a founder and there's another team of a whole bunch of other male with her, that he could be the CEO and all of that, then that number is higher. I know because if you look at the NASD, which is the venture industry there, it's 6% are women CEO, and if you're a woman founder, it should be bigger than that. Now, it has been going down, honestly, in the last few years, but you know, at the peak, I mean, 26% of our portfolio have a woman CEO, but that's not intentional, just because we're agnostic.
That's because you're actually just looking at what is going to drive a return and a response.
Well, I'm going to believe Anne over wherever I pull.
Yeah, that one I have data. I can show you the data.
I'm going to take Anne over this PitchBook data that's in Forbes.
Then you have to be careful with PitchBook, because PitchBook only take company of a certain size that got certain size funding.
That's right.
And there's a lot of women at the angel and seed level there that are not on PitchBook. I mean, their data there is not as good as Series B.
I think the bottom line is it's too low.
I mean, we're wasting half the brain of the US.
That's the bottom line.
And simplify view of it.
Especially when the data shows that, revenue and profits and ROI generated by female-led companies is significantly higher. It seems like the data shows that more investment should be flowing that way. All right, this is the final question. What is the top-ranking U.S. state for women-owned businesses in terms of overall numbers, employment, and revenue? Is it A, California, B, Florida, C, Georgia, or D, New York?
That one I don't know. I will bet California.
Yeah, that would have been my guess as well. The answer is C, Georgia.
Georgia? Well, are we talking dry cleaning, or are we talking textile?
Oregon, Idaho, Nevada, South Dakota rank among the top states for women-owned businesses in terms of overall numbers, employment, and revenue. So the explanation is that these are especially interesting stats because you might assume that highly populated cities like Chicago or New York would have more female-owned businesses due to the sheer number of people living there. But in reality, it appears that the less populated cities and states have more women-owned businesses, and that those businesses are successful in terms of revenue and employment.
I think the coolest part is what Anne talked about, where you have a process with HealthTech investors whereby you actually are very upfront with people about what that process is like. And maybe you could just give like a couple minute synopsis of it. And the outcome is fantastic because about 28% from what I saw are women founded and run startups, and 23% are diverse.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a woman and I'm an immigrant, so basically I'm unbiased. And so the group somehow gel very similarly, similar people attract each other. And so if you look at the group, 33% of our members are female, which is also unusual. And I think over 48% are non-white men, diversity there. But that was not intentionally. That's just the type of people who are attracted to basically take risk and try to move the needles and change things, because that's what angel investment is take really high risk and knowing that most of the time you're going to lose your money. And so the other thing, our process is we're very transparent. If you go to the healthtechcapital.com website, everything is there. The deadline, the dates, our process, type of question we ask. The one thing we do that's very unusual is that whenever you do fundraising, you never get feedback. And maybe, Rajiv, you had that experience. You talk to them, they seem interested, and then they disappear. You don't know if they're in Hawaii playing golf, and they don't get your email, so they just hate you. You hate your guts. But you had no feedback. It's like a black hole. And so my experience is that half the time people don't know how to communicate their vision and their story, as opposed to the problem in the business model itself. So when they present to us, for the company who gets selected to pitch to us, we give them the feedback on how we heard them, how we assess them. When they go through the due diligence process, even if we turn them down, I spend some time afterwards to say, this is how we perceive your product risk, your market risk, your team risk, your funding risk, and all of that. It's our perception. We put you on a low to medium. We get very specifics on some of the issue related to business models. And we got some great feedback because people say, thank God I get people telling me how they perceive. And at time it's communication style. At time, it's not really understanding. You spend too much time on the technology, not enough on the business models, on who is going to pay, especially in healthcare, is a big problem. Not understanding that your regulatory may be more challenging than you think it is, and or whatever all the challenges are. So we invest in businesses' problems and solutions. We don't invest in technology. And a lot of entrepreneurs pitch technology. So we give them the feedback because we're trying to be helpful. We want them to succeed, even if we ultimately did not invest at the time. And the reason why that's important, because at time they figure this out and then they come back to us and they know who helped them. And so we try to be value added, in the process. We also are being very respectful because we all have been begging ourselves for money. So we want to be treated the way we were not treated. And so we give them 15 minutes uninterrupted, which is a pretty rare gift if you have done fundraising.
That's amazing. Yes.
And then we ask them some questions there. We send them questions ahead of time. We don't try to do got you and show how smart we are. We know we're smart. We don't have to show that. We want to help, and we want to basically, give the best opportunity for the person to present themselves. And ironically, with COVID, now we use Zoom.
You're probably even more efficient.
We're much more efficient, and it's so easy for the entrepreneur. They don't have to schlep themselves across the country to see us.
That's pretty amazing. I think that's a real gift, that process that you've created, and you're clear about what's going to happen, because a lot of times it's just a black box. Mm-hmm. You send over an executive summary and it's a nightmare. So it's really great that you do it. So I have a couple more questions for you, Anne. One is, my daughter has a biomedical master's degree.
I talked to her.
You talked to her. Maybe you could share if she's looking at the next cool trend that she should go into, because I believe and I hope one day she becomes an entrepreneur like her parents. Where would you guide her? She already has a person who she could talk to, but where would you guide her? Because there's so much amazing innovation out there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are falling in love with technology as opposed to falling in love with the problem. I kind of repeat myself there. So right now we have all this.
So find a problem.
Right now with GPT, ChatGPT, AI, blah, blah, blah. And I said, that's just a better enabling technology there. Go about what's the problem you're trying to solve. I think if I'm talking about the world I know in healthcare, we need to move people outside the hospital into the home to basically allow them to manage themselves better, prevent, catastrophic situation, avoid the hospital there as much as you can. Here's the problem. The payment system is exactly the opposite. And every time we try to change and get value proposition there where we show we can have an impact, these people cannot get paid. So if you basically look at this as a big picture, which is how can we enable people to be more consumer-driven healthcare, and from a big picture point of view. In some way, Apple is doing a lot of that, but they're just stopping at a certain level in the severity. And take a piece of it and be very focused. Will it be brain cancer there? How can we help these people there? Or something about dementia at home or whatever it is. Then do a deep dive into what is wrong, and some are fixable and some are not fixable. If there is no code and for whatever reason there is going to be really a hard time, take an easier problem. So don't get yourself, beaten to pulp. So I will say, go understanding from a macro point of view, what is a big problem that for whatever reason people are not addressing. Then spend some time on what's the right technology to help you do that. You can always hire technologists. You cannot hire somebody to tell you what the problem is. That's your job.
And would you find that in a bigger company? Would you go to a earlier stage company, or just have that mindset of asking questions and being open to problem creation? Is that the way to think about it?
Yeah, well, that's a slightly different question, because I think when you come out of university, you haven't really learned the real world. I mean, somehow then they give you facts and numbers, but not necessarily how to work with other people and get things done through other people there. So what's nice about a big company for a couple of years is that they can teach you the industry, they can teach you how to do things. You may decide to break those things afterwards, but they tell you they're good at teaching you the real world, what's called the master in real world evidence. And do that for a couple of years. And some big companies have structure to do that. Try to do as many different jobs so you can figure out which one is yours. In my case, I did finance, manufacturing, sales, marketing, basically. And I was lucky that my first company allowed me to expose to all those different, specialty in 5 years. So that was a blessing. And then when I figured out what I liked, then I started hunting for a startup. Because by that time I had value to bring. If you go to a startup out of university, what you bring to the startup, you're smart, but that's kind of a normal criteria. That's not enough. And there's nobody to teach you anything. There's no redundancy in the system. And so it's very important in the early years that you have somebody who can teach you the business of working with other people to get things done.
That's really amazing. That's fantastic advice.
Wish I'd take that advice.
I actually went towards big company and then went smaller and smaller every time I went. And I definitely advise that path.
Yeah, I went the opposite way, and I also advise that path.
You did it the hard way.
Yeah, I did
the
the
hard way. Unfortunately, you took some of my advice. So if you were to pick one thing you'd love to do all the time, beyond the job that you're in, you say you're in an alternate universe and you get to do something new and different, or really focusing on something. If money's no object And I'm not saying money is an object for you, but if money's no object, you have art, you have beautiful art. I know you're into ballroom dancing. I know you're into bridge. You love to help entrepreneurs, startups, technology innovation. But if there's something beyond that or even outside of that, what would you like to do?
Well, when I was younger, I wanted to be an astronaut, but I quickly discovered that a Belgian female with glasses was kind of a big no-no. I did get the submission paperwork. I did look at it.
Of course you would.
But I had kind of these basic things. I had to be US and male and no glasses, and I couldn't change that. So, I mean, I've always liked to explore and be not at the bleeding edge, but just before the bleeding edge. So, that's a good question. I think if you're in your 20s, your 30s, that question would be answered differently than if you are getting later on. And so I don't know. I have to think about that one.
Well, Anne, I got to say, you've been a great guest. You've given us so many amazing nuggets of insight. It was just a thrill to be with you today. It's always a thrill when I get to sit and chat with you, but this one is a special one. So thank you so much for sharing your advice, your insight, your experiences. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, and thank you for the great question. And Sandeep, I'll still challenge your sources.
By all means, I'll get you their emails. We can go after them.
We're going to have a source war after this.
That's right.
That's okay. I'm open-minded. I just happen to be right and you were wrong, but that's okay.
Let me just start with that at the outset.
Perfect. All right.
Thank you so much, Anne.
Thank you, everybody.
That was an amazing conversation with Anne. She definitely nails the title, Releasing Your Inner Tiger.
So inspiring.
I love her descriptor about being fearless. She would coast until she got pushed, and then she took it to another level, whether it was in second grade, whether it was in high school, college, business school, going into companies. She just had this fire about her that stems from her mom, actually. And that enabled her to see things in a different way and bring it all the time.
I just love that she was also fearless in her empathy, because I think the scary part about being empathetic sometimes is that there's a humility to asking people about, hey, what are you struggling with? What's the hardest thing that you're going through right now? What are the problems you're trying to solve? Instead of coming in with, well, this is the problem and this is how it should be solved. It's this approach to listening and really
I love the way you put it. Just because someone's bold, it doesn't mean they won't listen to you. So bold doesn't mean you bowl people over. It means you actually open yourself up to them.
Right. There's a boldness in listening. There's a boldness in being empathetic. And I feel like she just absolutely embodies that to the extreme in a way that's like, wow, that is the most powerhouse empathy I've ever seen in action. It's really cool. And to me, it's transformative in thinking about the businesses that I'm working on, just thinking about it from the perspective of really trying to identify those problems, really coming at it from a place of what are people, what are my customers, what are my viewers, what do they really need, and how can we help solve that? It's really cool, really inspiring. It's and reframing.
I mean, for me, I thought I was a pretty good listener, but the way she puts it together and the details she goes to in taking that forward, that's the part that I learned a lot, so much from, just like you. It's just fantastic. All right. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the pod, please take a moment to rate it and comment. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and everywhere podcasts can be found.
This show is produced by myself, Sandeep Parikh, and Anand Shah, with production assistance by Taryn Talley and Jesse Deep, and edited by Sean Marr and Matt Greenleaf.
I'm your host, Rajiv Parikh from Position Squared, a leading growth marketing company based in Silicon Valley. Come visit us at position2.com.
This has been an Effin' Funny production.
We'll catch you next time. And remember, folks, be ever curious.